Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. On behalf of Training4You, I would like to welcome you tonight to this special evening. This is a special evening where we are welcoming a very special guest who came all the way from New Zealand to be with us here in Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about Mr. Brian Mulligan. Although I think whatever I say is not going to make a difference because everybody knows who Brian is, but I will try to make my best. Brian has trained as a physiotherapist in New Zealand and graduated in 1954. He has really honoring history of manual therapy, as he was introduced to the field by Stanley Paris in the early 1960s, and he acknowledges him as a mentor. Brian was one of in a small group of physiotherapists who formed the New Zealand Manipulative Therapists Association in 1968, and he and his colleague Robin McKenzie were the principal teachers on the newly formed postgraduate program for Diploma of Manual Therapy. He started his private practice in 1956, and he retired in the year 2000. Brian is still teaching around the world in different countries, and he joined the international lecturing circuit in 1972. The number of countries, although it says on the website that it's 91, I think it's going to be 92 now, because if we can add Saudi Arabia, and that's across different continents around the world. The Mulligan Concept Teachers Association was formed in 1996, and two of the main techniques that even we're going to talk about today, the revolution development of the mobilization with movement in 1985 and pain release phenomenon in 1986 or so forth. I think Ryan is going to correct me with the dates later on. We are really grateful for the hosting of King Faisal Specialist Hospital, and it is a great also honor to introduce to you the person who will interview Mr. Brian Mulligan. Mr. Khalid Al-Ubathani is a senior sports physiotherapist. He is the head of the Department of Physical Therapy in King Faisal Specialist Hospital, and he is older brother to me and really a dear colleague, and he will be interviewing Mr. Brian. So please, if you can come to the stage and we can start our interview.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good evening, everybody. Before it's really a great honor. I'm really overwhelmed right now. I don't know whether I'll do it in the right way or not. It's such a great honor to be sitting to a legend like Mr. Brian. First of all, I would like to thank Training4You for giving this honor to us to host such an evening like that. It is really a great honor for you guys. So thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this event. And thank you all to our guests who responded to the invitations. So we would like to welcome you here at King Faisal. Thank you all for coming. Actually, I was put in the spot by the guys. I was not supposed to be the one who present this interview, but I'll try my best. Okay. Now, I'm sure that everybody of you guys know about the legendary Mr. Brian Mulligan. So, Mr. Mulligan, can you please tell us about Brian Mulligan, the person himself?
Before I do that, can I thank the company that brought me here, Training4You.
Sure, you can.
And they're an incredible company, and I'm very grateful. They're promoting my concepts, and that's what I want. And I've got before me some very distinguished colleagues, and I'm honoured by your presence. But I get excited when I teach. And of course, I hope to share a couple of little gems with you tonight.
I'm sure you will.
Now, you asked about me.
Yes.
Oh, well, I had copies of the Christians, which was quite useful. And this makes it so much easier.
I hope they don't tell you what to say.
Yeah. But you know, I've been married for nearly 56 years.
Wow.
And in America, to be successful, you've got to have more than one wife. And Robin McKenzie and I will talk about him a bit later, but we only had one wife. And I'm successful because of my wife. I've had a wonderful wife, and she's been ever so supportive. And I shouldn't tell you this, but when I go away, I always leave a little note under a pillow. So when she goes to bed that night and she gets her nightdress out or whatever she wears, it says, "Dear Dawn, I do love you, and I will miss you, and I'll see you soon." Now, I think that's quite nice, but I went recently off to Brazil, and I had to be at the airport at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I forgot to leave a note. And she went to bed that night, and there was no note. So what I did, 4 days before I came here, I wrote her a note and put it under a pillow, just in case I forgot. But I didn't forget. But anyway, and we had 3 kids, a boy and 2 girls. We ended up with 6 grandchildren, and now, believe it or not, I'm a great-grandfather. So really, I shouldn't be here, should I? But, you know, just a bit about myself. I was a kid during the war, and I'm just saying to people today, before the war, you played cowboys and Indians. And you know, you'd get a bow and arrow. It wasn't sharp, but we played bows and arrows. And during the war, things changed a bit, and we weren't playing sort of bows and arrows against Indians. And I then had a desire to join the army, because you know what kids are like, boys are like, and I thought, well, I hope the war keeps going so I can go to war. And that's what boys do. And when I left college, I wanted to join the army, and I was even an under officer in cadets, and I failed the eyesight test, and I was devastated, because that was going to be my life in the army. And so I left school, and I went to work for a company, and it was called Imperial Chemical Industries. And I thought, oh, well, I'll do a science degree. And they said, oh, don't do a science degree. Everyone in this company that's successful, they've got accountancy degrees. So I started taking bookkeeping and company law and work law, and I was totally dissatisfied. And by sheer chance one day, I spoke to somebody who was doing physio. He was leaving me, and I said, what's physio? And I made some inquiries, and I became a physiotherapist. I didn't really know what it was, but I became one. And so I'm a bit of a fatalist. I suppose I was meant to be a physio, but what a life I've had. So there we are. That's about me.
Thank you for sharing your story. That was really amazing. I think we're lucky that you failed your sight test. Okay, Brian, one of your favorite quotes is from Mr. Louis Pasteur. And the field of discovery, chance only favors the prepared mind. Can you tell us how did this lead you to your current concept, or did this by any means lead you to develop your concept?
That's an incredible thing that he said. And in the 1970s and 80s, in New Zealand, I was responsible for teaching all the manual therapy techniques for the extremities. And I also used to teach manipulation for the upper cervical spine. So I've been teaching this for some time, and my mentor in those days was Freddie Kaltenborn. And Freddie Kaltenborn was a Norwegian who after the war did physiotherapy, and he went all around Europe learning different techniques from different people in the field of manual therapy, and he set up his own program. He's still alive today, he's about 87 or 88, but he taught me to manipulate every joint in the spine. And that was fun, clicking spines, and I had a lot of fun. But one day, I had a girl come to see me, and she was playing basketball. Well, that's like netball, but basketball, and she'd sprained a finger. And being a good manual therapist, when she came to see me, it was all swollen. So I thought, right, I'll give her some ultrasonic first. So I put her hand in a water bath and gave her some ultrasonic, and she couldn't bend the finger. So after the ultrasonic, I said, can you bend your finger? And she said, no. And now I used all the techniques I've been teaching. So the first thing I did was give her some traction. So I got hold of the finger, and I pulled it for 10 seconds, and I did it 10 times, and I thought, now, can you bend your finger? And the stupid girl said she couldn't. And I thought, well, all right, when you flex your finger, the distal phalanx, the distal facet goes down, so I'll give her, a la biomechanics, some mobs in that direction. So I did these steadily for a while, and then said, now, can you bend your finger? She said, no. And she was getting fed up because she had a very painful, sore finger. And I thought, what do I do now? I didn't tell her that. So I got hold of the finger, and I tried a translation medially on this finger. Oh, she said. And I thought, oh, I better not do that. And then I went in the other direction, and she happened to say to me, oh, that doesn't hurt. And she spoke rather, briskly. She wasn't very happy with what I was doing. But by some miracle, I held it in this pain-free position. Oh, I said, can you bend your finger? Oh, she said, I can. I was astonished. I didn't tell her that. And I said, of course. What had I done? Now, here I was responsible for teaching all the manual therapy techniques for extremities. I tried what I was teaching on this finger, and they didn't work. And suddenly, we had this sort of miraculous response. So I must confess, I went home, I asked my wife's permission, could I dream about her? Because I wanted to think about what I'd done. So I dreamt about her for 2 days, and the only explanation I could come up with, I didn't have a brilliant brain, was the most simple explanation of them all, was that maybe she had a positional fault. And when I corrected it, something happened. So now I wanted another finger. Well, how many fingers do you get? And I was getting a bit frustrated. So then I thought, I wonder if what I'd done on that finger, I wonder if I could do something with other joints. So I started to experiment on my patients. And I had the most exciting 2 or 3 years of my life. And my wife would get sick of it. I'd go home and say, you've got no idea what I did with a wrist or an elbow or a knee. And slowly, this whole concept of mobilizations with movement evolved. And it changed my life. And I think they're quite unique. And I've got notes here. Yes. No, I won't go any further at the moment because I know what questions are coming up. And I'll see if he gets the questions right.
Okay. Well, you must be a very brave man to tell your wife you want to dream about a girl. You're lucky she let you sleep after that. Mr. Brian, usually in your concept, you always consider mobilization with weight bearing. How do you think this is important in the field of manual therapy?
That's interesting because I started initially doing mobilizations in sitting in the cervical spine, and I called them NAGs, natural apophyseal glides. And I would sit the patient down, and I'd locate on the spinous process, and I'd mobilize them on the treatment plane of the facet joints. And all the mobilizations in those days being taught, people would lie on their tummies, flatten their noses, and you went to the back of them, you did PAs. And that would work in many people. But I thought, now, if I went in the facet planes, would that be better? And when the patient is sitting, I found that I was getting results mobilizing in weight bearing. And then that sort of developed from there, because when you assess patients, most of them have trouble in weight bearing, and not when they're lying down. If you've got a sore back, you can often curl up and it's all right, but when you stand up and bend over, you've got pain. So I decided that I should be treating my patients in a functional position to see if I could help them. And that proved to be very special and very useful. But it all began originally with the neck and the cervical spine. And it was done in weight bearing and in sitting, and it was so exciting.
Okay, one of very interesting approach when you talk about deciding which technique you want to use your patient is called the pill effect. Can you please tell us more about that?
Oh, yes, the pill effect. And it's rather a neat word, because when you take a tablet, a pill, you're expected to do something. And I found that when I was treating patients and I was going to use mobilizations with movement, I found that when they were indicated, as you repositioned the joint surfaces, you felt no pain at all. That's P for pain-free. So the P of pill, these were pain-free techniques when you reposition joint surfaces. And then I found that when you move the joint while you're maintaining this repositioning, you got an instant result, and that movement was also pain-free. So the first indication for using these techniques would be on assessment that they were pain-free, you got an instant result, and the LL stood for long-lasting. Because if you treat somebody and they come back 2 days later and they're just as bad, you think, oh, we'll try it again. And if you tried it 3 times, please do something else. But sometimes you haven't given them the right advice. If you treat somebody with headaches, for instance, and they lie on their tummies, that's the worst thing you can do. And you can treat a person and make them better, and they ruin it at night by lying on their tummies. So there's a bit more to that. But with the pill effect, it's part of your assessment. You try a mobilization with movement. If you get a pill effect, your assessment becomes a treatment. And the wonderful thing about that is it takes you perhaps 2 minutes to decide if they're indicated. Just 2 minutes. People come out and within 2 minutes you know that you're going to use these techniques, because the patient says, wow, I feel better straight away. And if they don't, do something else. But yeah, the pill response, it's really, yes.
Thank you, Brian. More than 100 papers have been published, studying your concept in the field of manual therapy. Do you think these research really support the concept as a treatment, alternative in the field of evidence-based practice?
That's a jolly good question. And I've got some notes here. We now have indisputable proof for tennis elbow. Our treatment for tennis elbow was the first physiotherapy procedure to ever make the British Medical Journal. And it has now made the JAMA, the journal, the American Medical Journal, and it showed that our procedure was better than injections for tennis elbow. And everyone that had our procedure used to fix their tennis elbow at the end of 12 months had no recurrences, and every single patient that had had injections had a recurrence of their tennis elbow within 12 months. And that was quite an astonishing article, and one of the authors of that has been travelling around the world talking about it, Bill Vicenzino, because that was quite special. So tick off, you must know what we do for tennis elbow. Headaches. Toby is in the country at the moment. He's arriving tonight, and Toby Hall's one of my teachers. He's got a PhD, and Toby's been responsible for more research on my concepts than anybody. And he's now sewn up what we do for headaches from cervical origins. And we've now got indisputable proof that what we do should be used on patients with headaches when it's coming from the cervical spine. So we can tick off that. Knees. We've now got proof that people with early arthritic knees respond to our procedures, our mobilizations with movement, and that's been published, and it's effective. Dizziness is quite exciting, and an enormous study has just been completed in Brisbane, and they used our approach for dizziness of cervical origin and they've had a 12-year follow-up, and the results are superb. And the average age people had had dizziness for in this study was 7 years. These are people, every time they look up, for 7 years have been dizzy, and no one could help them. And all these people did so well that it will eventually be published in ear, nose and throat journals or medical journals. But for dizziness, you've got to know what we do, because it's just marvellous. I just can't believe it. And can I tell you a little aside to that? I had a guy come to see me once, and he was referred with refluxing. And I didn't know what refluxing was, but he said he'd had a sore neck. So I sat him down, and I remember his name today, Mr. Cowie, and I said, oh, let's have a look. Turn to the right. He said, that's all right. I said, look up. He said, that's all right. I said, now look to the left. He refluxed. Oh, I suddenly found out what refluxing was, and it was contagious. As he went, I went, and it wasn't very nice. And I thought, oh dear, and I panicked. I didn't think about this because the term refluxing was new to me. So I remember getting hold of this man's neck on the right side, and I said, now turn to the left. And I went, and I said, oh dear. So then I got hold of C2 at the back and repositioned C2 on the occiput and C1, and he turned, and then I went on the other side and secured my thumb on the transverse process of C1. I said, can you turn now? And he turned all the way without refluxing. And I didn't reflux either. Now, it was just as simple as that. And I did it once, and I thought, I better try it again. So I tried it once more. Oh, he said, thank you, I'm all better. And he hadn't worked for 9 months with refluxing. But it's really the same as dizziness. If you're dizzy with certain movements from your neck, the treatment's exactly the same. But I'd never had a patient that was refluxing before. But you can imagine it. You feel wonderful when you can do something like that with these hands. And ankle sprains. Every textbook in the world will change within the next 10 years. Otherwise, I'll come back and do some complaining. Because we've got proof now that there are positional faults following ankle sprains, and you're supposed to have clinical evidence for what you do. Well, what we do currently for the sprained ankle is hopeless, because 80% of them, up to 80%, get recurrences. So we can fly to the moon, and we can't fix an ankle properly, and you get recurrences. Well, I know why. Because when you sprain an ankle, your joint swells, and the diagnosis is it's the ligament. The ligament's not within the joint. Why is the joint swelling if it's the ligament? And people overlook this. They just treat the ligament, and that's stupid. And I remember in Australia, they made me their special guest for a year, and I went all over Australia lecturing, and I was in one city, and a young boy comes in with his mother on crutches, and he was all bound up, and he had a painful ankle, and we just treated his fibula, and he walked and had morning tea with us, and I carried his crutches. But you wait, you better know what we do for sprained ankles, and if that doesn't change textbooks within 10 years, I'm not Brian Mulligan. I probably won't be then anyway. But anyway, that proves the positional fault theory. And there's more in the pipeline. There's a new study coming up now where the evidence is going to be on film, and it's going to be published by Bond University, and it's going to be quite unique. And when that gets published, that's going to change what people should do with their patients. And the other thing is, when I go to America, I treat people on the stage. And 2 years ago, we filmed every person that I treated, and they're being followed up at the moment, and they're going to write a paper on the outcomes we achieved just seeing people once in the States and how they got on a year later. And I can't wait for that to be published, but that's going to be a unique study as well. So we're on the way with